Signed from the judge, Wendell Rohr started his opening statement. He told the jury that he'd prove that Mr. Jacob Wood, a fine fellow, developed lung cancer after smoking cigarettes for almost 30 years. The cigarettes killed him. How could they prove that cigarettes caused lung cancer? They'd bring along cancer experts and talk to people who used to work in the tobacco industry. Rohr finished in 50 minutes, smiled, and sat down. Durwood Cable, for the defense, spoke for under 30 minutes. He calmly assured the jurors that Pinex had its own experts who would clearly explain that cigarettes don't cause lung cancer. Cable spoke without notes, looking carefully into the eyes of each juror. His voice and stare were honest. You wanted to believe this man. The first crisis occurred at lunch. Judge Harkin announced the noon break at 12:10, and the jurors left the court. Lou Dell took them to the jury room.
"Just have a seat," she said, "and lunch will be here in a moment."
Herman Grimes took a seat at the head of the table next to Millie Dupree, a kind woman of 50 who actually knew another blind person. Nicholas introduced himself to Lonnie Shaver, the only black man on the jury and the manager of a grocery store. 20 minutes passed, and no lunch appeared. At 12:30, Nicholas said, "Hey, Herman, where's our lunch?" "I'm just the foreman," Herman answered with a smile, as the room was suddenly quiet. Nicholas walked to the door and asked Lou Dell to come in. "We're hungry," he said. Lou Dell looked at the other 11 faces and said,
"It's on the way."
"Where's it coming from?" he demanded.
"O'Reilly's restaurant, just around the corner."
"Listen," said Nicholas, "we can't go out and eat a nice lunch like normal people, so if lunch is going to be here, I hope there isn't going to be a problem every day. I suggest you get on the phone and find out where it is, or I'll discuss it with Judge Harkin." The door closed.
"That was a bit hard, don't you think?"
asked Millie Dupree. "Maybe, and if it was, I'll apologize," said Nicholas. "But if we don't get things organized at the beginning, they'll forget about us. Do you realize that in almost every trial, they allow the jurors to go out and eat?"
"How do you know?"
asked Millie Dupree. "I know a little about the system. I had 2 years of law school." The other jurors were impressed. No food had arrived by 12:45.
"It should be here soon,"
said Lou Dell nervously.
"I'm really sorry."
"Where's the men's room?" asked Nicholas. Lou Dell gave him directions, but Nicholas walked past the door and out of the courthouse to Mary Mahoney's, a local restaurant. Nicholas had done the same walk a week ago, and had even eaten at a table close to Judge Harkin's. He went up to the judge's table. "Sorry to interrupt, sir," Nicholas said. "What are you doing here?" Harkin asked. "I'm here on behalf of your jury. While you're having a nice lunch here, we're sitting in a tiny room waiting for food. We're hungry and we're upset." Harkin stood up. "Well, let's go and see." When they got back to the jury room, the table was bare. No food. The time was 1:05. Lou Dell suddenly arrived. She was breathless.
"I just talked to O'Reilly's," she said. "Someone called them to say we wouldn't need lunch until 1:30.
"These people are starving," said the judge. He turned to the jury. "I'm very sorry. This won't happen again." He paused, looked at his watch, and smiled. "I'm inviting you to follow me to Mary Mahoney's and join me for lunch." The restaurant served the jurors with delicious grilled seafood. Nicholas was the hero of the day. Later, Mr. O'Reilly met with Judge Harkin. He swore on a Bible that he'd talked to a woman who said she was ringing from the courthouse. She'd instructed him to deliver lunch at exactly 1:30. The trial's first witness was the dead man, Jacob Wood, testifying on a video which had been filmed a few months before his death. He was thin and pale and sounded sick. He was 51 and looked 20 years older. When the jury felt sleepy, the judge gave them a break. The 4 smokers needed a cigarette, and Lou Dell took them to a separate room.
"If you can't stop smoking after this trial, something's wrong," she said jokingly.
The 4 didn't smile. Jerry Fernandez, 38, a car salesman with casino debts and a bad marriage, lit his cigarette first. Then he passed his lighter to the 3 women. "Here's to Jacob Wood," Jerry said. The 3 women said nothing. They were busy smoking. One of them was a tall woman with a long pointed nose called Sylvia Taylor Tatum. "I wonder who's next," Jerry continued.
"I guess all those doctors,"
Sylvia replied, sucking hard on her cigarette. The woman's name was Marlee. At least, that was the name she'd chosen for this period of her life. She was 30, with short brown hair and brown eyes. She'd been in the courtroom before, and she knew her way around. She sat in the back row, and just before the judge arrived, she asked one of the deputies to deliver a letter to Rankin Fitch. Fitch was surprised to see his name on the envelope. No one knew his name, except his employees and clients. He read the note.
"Tomorrow, juror number 2, Easter, will wear a gray and red sweater, white socks, and brown leather shoes."
Fitch went up to the deputy who was standing by the courtroom door. "Who gave you this?" "A woman. I don't know her name." Fitch questioned the deputy about her appearance and voice. With Jose, his driver, he looked around the first floor of the courthouse. Then, as if they were just enjoying some fresh air, the 2 men walked around the outside of the courthouse. Who was she? And what was going on? Fitch had thought about entering Easter's apartment before, but now he knew it was necessary. He sent Jose and another man, Doyle, to the apartment building while Easter was in court. Inside, Doyle photographed the apartment. He was there for no more than 10 minutes. Nicholas left the courthouse on foot and stopped at O'Reilly's for some food. He was certain he was being followed. When he got to his apartment, he entered a 4-number code on the door before he unlocked it. He went to his computer and found that an illegal entry had occurred at 4:52 p.m. The secret camera, hidden above the refrigerator, had filmed Doyle. Nicholas watched the video and stared at Doyle's face. He'd never seen him before. Nicholas smiled as he saw Doyle looking at his computer. It was impossible to enter. Doyle couldn't even find the power switch. At 8 the next morning, Fitch was hiding in a van by Easter's apartment and watched him walk out into the sunshine. Fitch looked out of the van window. "I don't believe it." Gray and red sweater, white socks, brown shoes. Fitch went straight to his office. "We have to find the girl," he said. "She has something for us." His office was in the back of an empty store. No one noticed the place, and it was just a short walk from the courthouse. 2 men with guns guarded the door at all times. The furniture was cheap, but the office was full of the latest technology. The walls of one room were covered with photos of the jurors. The room at the back was the smallest, and was kept locked. It was a viewing room. One of Fitch's people had hidden a tiny camera in a document case, which was placed in the courtroom under the defense table, and which secretly filmed all the jurors. In the viewing room, 2 jury consultants watched the results on a large screen. When Fitch talked to Cable, he could tell him how the jurors seemed to be feeling. Cable, however, didn't know about the hidden camera. The deal was organized over a 3-hour lunch. Luther Vandermeer, CEO of Trelco, one of the big four tobacco companies, and his friend Larry Zell of Listing Foods had already talked about it on the phone. Trelco wasn't in court this time, but the big four had to stand together. Zell understood. He'd worked for Trelco for 17 years. There was a small regional grocery company, Hadley Brothers, which owned stores along the Mississippi coast. One store was in Biloxi, and its manager was a smart young black man called Lonnie Shaver, who, by chance, was on the jury in the Pinex trial. Vandermeer wanted one of Listing Foods' divisions, Superhouse, a much larger group of grocery stores, to purchase Hadley Brothers. It would be a small deal, and nothing could go wrong. Listing and Trelco were totally independent of each other, and Listing was already in the grocery store business. Later, of course, there would need to be a reorganization of the company, and pressure could be put on Lonnie Shaver to support the defense. They needed to act quickly. The trial was only due to last for 4 more weeks. Chapter 3. Lonnie Shaver's Opportunity. Easter made sure he was easy to follow over the weekend. On Saturday, he worked all day selling computers, then he returned to his apartment and didn't leave it. On Sunday, he drove to the harbor, where he met Jerry Fernandez. They left in a fishing boat with 2 others, and returned 8.5 hours later with red faces, a can full of fish, and a boat full of empty beer cans. Fishing was the first hobby of Nicholas Easter that anyone had been able to discover. And Jerry was the first friend. There was no sign of the girl. She waited only until Monday morning, 30 minutes before the trial restarted. Fitch was in his office. An assistant, Conrad, said,
"There's a phone call you might like to take."
"Her name?"
"She won't say."
"Any idea how she got the number?"
"No."
"Are you tracing it?"
"Yes. Give us a minute. Keep her on the line."
Fitch lifted the telephone receiver. "Yes," he said, as nicely as possible.
"Is this Mr. Fitch?"
she asked, quite pleasantly. "It is. And who is this?"
"Marlee. In about 20 minutes, juror number 12, Fernandez, will walk into the courtroom holding a copy of Sports Illustrated, the October 12 issue."
"I see," said Fitch. "Anything else?"
"No, not now."
Conrad raced in. "The call came from a payphone in Gulf Point, a convenience store." "What a surprise," said Fitch, as he grabbed his jacket and began straightening his tie. "I guess I'll run to court." In the jury room, Nicholas waited until the general conversation died down. He said loudly, "Well, did anyone get bribed or followed over the weekend?" There were a few laughs, but no confessions.
"Why does the judge keep asking questions like that?"
asked Millie Dupree. "In similar cases, there have been some problems with the jurors," Nicholas explained. "I don't think we should discuss this," Herman said. "Why not? It's harmless. This isn't about evidence. This is about—" He hesitated a second for effect, then continued. "This is about trying to control the jury." Nicholas had the jurors' attention. "There was a tobacco trial, very similar to this, in Quitman County, Mississippi, about 7 years ago. There was some pretty shocking behavior, before and during the trial. Judge Harkin is watching us carefully. Lots of people are watching us."
"Who?"
asked Millie. "Both sides," answered Nicholas. "Both sides hire these jury consultants, and they come here to help pick the perfect jury. The perfect jury is one that will deliver the verdict that they want. They study us before we're selected." "How do they do that?" one of the jurors asked. "Well, they photograph us, our apartments, our offices, and our kids. It's just legal, but it's close to being illegal. They might check our tax records and talk to our neighbors." All 11 jurors were listening, trying to remember if they'd seen any strangers hiding around street corners with cameras. Nicholas drank some coffee and continued. "After the jury's been picked, it's a little different. Now they're only watching 15 people. The 12 jurors and the 3 extra jurors. Throughout the trial, each side will have jury consultants in the courtroom trying to read our reactions. They usually sit on the first 2 rows. They're well-dressed, and they stare at us all the time." "I thought those folks were newspaper reporters," said another juror, retired Colonel Frank Herrera. "I hadn't noticed," said Herman Grimes. Everyone smiled. "Watch them today," Nicholas said. "In fact, I have a great idea. There's one woman who I'm almost positive is a jury consultant for the defense. Every morning since the trial began, she's been on the front row behind Durwood Cable. When we go out this morning, let's stare at her. All 12 of us." "Even me?" Herman asked. "Yes, Herm, even you. Just turn to 10 o'clock and stare with the rest of us."
"Why are we playing games?"
asked Sylvia Taylor Tatum. "Why not? What else have we got to do for the next 8 hours? Let's do it while Judge Harkin is reminding us about all the rules. That always takes 10 minutes. Lou Dell came for them at 9. Nicholas held 2 magazines, one of which was Sports Illustrated. He walked beside Jerry Fernandez until they came to the courtroom, then said to his new friend, "Want something to read?" Jerry took the magazine. "Sure, thanks," he said. They walked through the door into the courtroom. Fitch knew Fernandez, juror number 12, would have the magazine, but the sight of it was still a shock. His surprise quickly turned to excitement. Marley was clearly working on the outside. Maybe there were 2 or 3 or 4 members of the jury who were plotting with her. It didn't matter how many jurors were involved. Fitch just wanted to make a deal. The jury consultant's name was Ginger. She'd sat through dozens of trials. She looked at the jury and waited for the judge to greet them, which he did. Most of the jurors nodded and smiled at the judge. Then all of them, including the blind man, turned and stared directly at her. She looked away. Judge Harkin continued asking the jurors one question after another, and he too quickly noticed that the jury were looking at the same person. They kept staring, all together. Nicholas found it difficult not to laugh. His luck was unbelievable. 2 rows behind Ginger sat Rankin Fitch. It was difficult to tell exactly who the jurors were staring at, Ginger or Fitch. Ginger certainly thought it was her. She found some notes to read. Fitch felt helpless as the 12 faces studied him. Judge Harkin finished his questions quickly. "Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Now we will continue with Dr. Milton Frick." After Dr. Frick had spoken, there was a short break as a new witness, Dr. Robert Bronsky, was called by Wendell Rohr. Fitch was in his office when the call came. "It's Marley, line 4, Conrad whispered. "Trace the call," Fitch ordered. "Hello."
"Mr. Fitch?"
came the familiar voice. "Yes?"
"Do you know why they were staring at you?"
"No."
"I'll tell you tomorrow. And if you keep tracing the calls, I'll stop calling."
Conrad arrived with the expected news that the call had been made from a payphone.